Hello. By now, you would appreciate that we don't participate in occupations in a vacuum. The environment exerts a powerful influence on our ability to identify, choose, perform, or participate in occupations. Environments enable and/or constrain our occupational potential. Environments dictate what every human being can do, be, and become. Politics and environment are intertwined, particularly if we consider politics to be about power and resources. But we'll turn to definitions in a minute. In this lecture, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I, as usual, have some thoughts to put to you, and as mentioned, a few definitions. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so what I want to do is firstly talk about the idea of micro and macro, and politics and economics are definitely one of those things that are at the macro level of the continuum. In terms of macro, we are thinking about overarching factors that exert influence on more immediate concerns. The micro level might be thought of as being something much closer to the individual or the client, their immediate physical and social contexts, their family, home, workplace, their personal and social relationships, financial resources, and their personal capabilities. Now, this slide shows a depiction of the idea of micro and macro from an economic perspective. And you'll see what some of the factors are when you think about the environment in a macro sense: global, technological, population and demographic issues, and, as you can see, legal and political. And then in this very economic example, of course, there's, in a business case, there are things like customers, competitors, the market. Depending on which way you look at that, you might think that some of those are macro issues too. But against each other, you can see that one set of circles overarches and is much bigger than the second. Okay, now what I have here is something taken from a Facebook post from just a couple of days ago. You might remember just last Wednesday, there was a significant protest in Flinders Street in the city that closed that end of the city for a few hours. This was a protest about homeless people and where they can and cannot attempt to live. This Facebook post was put on by the Greens, and it's referring to what we might call the start of a political power play on the issue of homelessness. In this political show, the leader of the local government area within which the issue is concerned, the Lord Mayor Robert Doyle, has put forward a proposal endorsed by his councillors to ban the setting up of temporary homes or camping in the city. Now, just an interesting aside, Robert Doyle has Liberal affiliations, and some years ago missed out on becoming the Victorian Premier, but managed to get himself voted in as the Lord Mayor. So this is the post from the Greens where they are talking a little bit more about their concerns. And I can read this out. Last night, Council voted to change local laws to make rough sleeping an offence. Greens councillors led the charge against the changes and sought to remove the most damaging part of the new laws, the broadening of the definition of camping, which makes it an offence to camp anywhere in public. The Greens amendment was defeated 4 votes to 5, and the overall motion was supported 5 votes to 4. Homeless service providers and community legal services were unanimous in their opposition to the proposal, and the gallery was full of homeless people and their allies imploring council not to make homeless people themselves the problem. Though the council vote last night was disappointing, there's still opportunity to influence the local law. The law amendments will go out for public submissions shortly before returning to council. And the Greens are making a statement here that they will continue to work and vote in the interests of the most vulnerable and marginalised members of the community. Now, in this post and through the previous post, you can see that one party seeks to take up the cause in the interests of vulnerable and marginalised people against the other side. With my occupational hat on, I am wondering about the occupational consequences of this political show of force and an ensuing change in law. How will these folks' daily occupations be impacted by being forced to create a home elsewhere? If they're shifted on, will they have better or worse ability to manage their self-care occupations, access health services? Will they be better or worse off in terms of making money that might happen through busking or begging or working part-time in the city, whatever that is? How are their social relationships impacted and their personal safety? How might this political issue result in the release of funds to make available more affordable housing and or secure temporary housing? Just a quote from a recent text, and that is by Mackenzie, who observed that political institutional contexts are fundamental to the availability and management of environments within which occupations are performed. And here's a political arena within which issues to do with homelessness and the resulting occupational consequences, which not everybody will see, but as occupational therapists, we need to have our occupational glasses on and see these issues. This is a point for consideration for us. Now, you'll no doubt be starting to dream about the Canadian model of occupational performance enablement, perhaps dream it was never invented. But just to remind you about this broader contextual outer ring, in this depiction, the political and economic environment is implicitly situated. So, down to a few definitions, and I went to good old easy Wikipedia to find a few definitions, and one is that politics relates to organised control over a human community, particularly a state. It is also the study or practice of the distribution of power and resources within a given community, as well as the interrelationships between communities. So this organised control is exerted from our governing structures, government, be it local, state or federal. Although many of you might observe that governments and government officials are actually controlled by wealthy individuals who sit outside of government. These individuals must control and influence governing officials because they help pass laws or bills that enable them to engage in their productive occupation of making money. Now, the word governing and government is really, I guess, an important word here. I can remember when I worked in London, one of my clients referred to my boss as the governor. They wanted a stair lift to get upstairs, up and down. And I said, oh, I'll need to talk to my supervisor. And they said, when you talk to your governor, make sure you tell him all this then. So, you know, the idea of governing and government is not just the political party who are leading us. The governor is the person who has power in a particular situation. So, more definitions. This one from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. A couple of definitions. The organisation, machinery or agency through which a political unit exercises authority and performs functions and which is usually classified according to the distribution of power within it. For example, she works at the federal government. Another definition is that government is the complex of political institutions, laws and customs through which the function of governing is carried out. So what about politics as method? Politics as method could be thought of as the promotion or forcing of one's own political views among people, negotiating with other political subjects, the making of laws and exercising force, including warfare against adversaries. Politics are exercised within and between clans and tribes of traditional societies through modern local governments, companies and institutions, up to sovereign states to the international level. That's also from Wikipedia. Now, there's a couple of other words that are important, and far be it from me to provide a very basic kind of Australian politics lesson. Some of you will have far more knowledge than I am presenting here, but just at a very basic level, it's good to know about this idea of legislation and policy. Governments are responsible for generating policy and also to fund those policies to enable their implementation. Policies are a statement or a plan of action, and they generally encompass the vision and commitment of those people in power. But plans or actions need to be legislated to make them lawful. So people's ideas, whether they are great or not so great, need to be made lawful. And the legislative process is that of making law, in which bills are presented for voting and passing in the Houses of Parliament, which we could think of as the political playroom. Some important legislation which has been passed that has relevance to our work and to occupation includes the International Bill of Human Rights from 1948, which is an international law, the Disability Discrimination Act from 1992, which had widespread societal changes, and more recently the Gillard government passed the National Disability Insurance Scheme Act, or it was passed when the Gillard government was in power. So they're just a few terms that we might think, well, how do politics impact occupations? But how do policies, how do laws, and how do bills and acts that have been legally passed impact occupations? What do we do to change laws? And you know, these changes and resistance to laws that might constrain policies and laws and policies that might constrain occupation, these sorts of things require thought as well. So what? Lalibert Rudman observes that a comprehensive understanding of how occupations are shaped, negotiated and experienced by individuals and collectives requires attention to not only macro elements of contexts, but also individual lives. So for us as occupational therapists, we will be involved in the lives of people, and we can make changes at the micro level, but there is also this larger macro context that we need to think about. And politics is an occupational issue, right down to who we vote for, right down to how we choose to implement policies that are passed down as well. Policies at the macro level do even impact right down to our personal identity, how we do, who we can become, and who we are. And I like this quote from Phelan and Kinsella, who talk about the development of identity amongst children with disability. But I think it's relevant here. They say perhaps part of who we are is what we can do, and also what we don't do, can't do, will do, won't do, like to do, don't like to do, want to do, have access to do, are allowed to do, are forbidden to do now, did before, virtually do, and so on. So that idea of having access to do and being allowed to do is very much politically governed, whether that be at the national level or just even within an institution. And I guess I encourage all of you to think about the actions that you can have in your personal life. We had a lecturer here some years ago who regularly sent letters to the editor of The Age to just point out injustices. Some of them, you know, often made observations of policies and politicians. But we need to have a political radar, and we need to think about the extent to which policies will enable our clients. Sometimes those policies can be negative policies that, you know, we might need to put aside what we think about them in terms of whether they might actually have something bigger to contribute to the common good. So just a very short lecture today, and there's just a few references, but I encourage you to think big, think macro, and you don't have to scratch too far around in the media to see how politics plays out in the lives of all of us. Thank you.